So welcome to this episode of the Bible Feed podcast. We're going to do something a little bit different for this first episode for 2023. We do one-to-one conversations and cover a specific subject, but today we've got the whole gang together, those that have contributed to the podcast over the last 12 months. So I've got here with me, Paul, I've got Laurence, Dan, and Josh. So welcome to you all.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Paul.
Hi. So what we're going to do in this episode is just do a little bit of looking back over the last year, what we've covered in some of our podcasts, and maybe some other random things from last year, and then take a look forward as to what we're going to do in the year ahead. So let's think first of all about some of the things that we've covered in the podcasts for 2022, and I'm going to start with a question for you, Dan, which is,
okay.
What on earth is the connection between Ecclesiastes, that little book in the Old Testament somewhere that might be a little bit hard to find sometimes, and Fat Boy Slim? I mean, how did we get those two things together into a podcast?
We most definitely did achieve that, didn't we? And it was the highlight of the year for me. I reckon we could probably squeeze Fatboy Slim in a few other occasions. Yeah, it was. So Ecclesiastes, that dark and depressing book about what is the meaning of life, and life is a vapor, there's not much point, life is meaningless, all that, those all kind of ideas vanity. All is vanity, that's it. All those ideas come out of that book. And so, you know, if that is the real worldview, and of course the end of the book, as in our podcast episode, we concluded that isn't actually what the book is trying to say. But if that's all there was to life, then you may as well just eat, sleep, rave, repeat, in the words of Fatboy Slim. Suppose you could take the rave out and replace it with whatever activity you like to do, and there you go. Eat, sleep, fish, repeat. If that's all there is,
excellent.
If there's nothing else to life, then just do it. Of course, there isn't. You know, that's what Ecclesiastes, the preacher, is. It's communicating. It's part of the Old Testament, part of the Bible, to sort of communicate this is a worldview, but actually there is something greater. Okay,
and Fatboy Slim hasn't been the only popular culture reference that has occurred in the podcast over the last 12 months. I seem to remember there were quite a few in the chat I had with Mark Vincent on life's biggest questions and the book that he's done. I think we amassed quite a few in there. There's lyrics from Queen songs, Bob Dylan, Star Wars references, Lord of the Rings. I think The Sound of Music was in there. There's probably a couple of others.
Yeah, you're so very, very cultured, aren't you all? There was, I think you referred to Simon and Garfunkel as well, didn't you? Which I think
did.
That was in the Ecclesiastes episode again. Ballad
of Richard Corey or something like that.
Yeah. And then of course there was the Whitney Houston song, Imagining Judgment Day, just completely different subset of genre, just to appeal to everyone.
So I mean, there's a whole cross section of things there. I mean, why is it that when we discuss the Bible, there are some things in popular culture that just seem to resonate with the topics that we're talking about? How does that come about?
One of the things is that, you know, a lot of the questions that great artists or just plain artists wrestle with are questions that the Bible looks at, because those are, you know, human questions that everyone is interested in. You know, why is the world the way it is, and what is my place within it? But, you know, great art highlights things that we might not see initially, and so too each time you go to the Bible and you're reading about an account about a person who's going through something similar to what you might have been experiencing or coming up against. That thing that can open up new thinking, can get you to ask better questions and think about things in a new way. So I think it's totally normal that Whitney Houston has made it into a podcast about the Bible.
Yeah, I think we did a section on, was it the soul? Was that this year, Paul, that we covered that? And
I think that might have been the previous year.
Previous year. So there you go. It's an ongoing theme year after year. And I think, you know, as Josh said, you know, the kind of underlying battles of good and evil narrative that actually, you know, you find in the Bible. It's a great backdrop to any kind of artistic form, really. You wouldn't have any Star Wars movie without the battle between good and evil. So maybe we should do a series on how Christianity has shaped the arts. That would be a really cool series to do.
Yeah, well, if any of us actually have an artistic background, that would be great.
Yeah, we should get somebody in to do that, probably.
But those things like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, I mean, they tend to paint the good versus evil, the good guys and the bad guys. It's pretty clear and black and white as to who's on what side. I would say actually that when we look at the biblical narratives and the biblical characters, they tend to come through somewhat more nuanced than that. In that there's good characters definitely, but they're often presented with their failings and the times that they go astray. So and we have considered a few characters when we were looking at Genesis, we thought about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and people like that. But there's a character that, as I was reviewing what we've covered, I came across in one of our episodes. And Laurence, I think you need to explain who this character is. Tremendous Hummus.
He is a historical character. Well, he's either historical or hysterical. We're not quite certain what. Yeah, this was kind of our Asterix education going a bit, sort of taking us off the rails a little somewhat.
Now we're very
got
cultured.
out of hand.
Yes.
Yeah. Asterix, you can learn a lot from Asterix.
Yeah, you can.
Listeners, go out and read the full back catalogue. So I think the point of that character, who is not a historical character, he was somebody we dreamt up in order to kind of paint a picture, wasn't he, of first century Christian life. And I think his full title that we gave him was Tremendous Hummus, the Chef from Milvian Bridge. So he was a character who was a Christian in the first century, and we kind of put him into context. How would it have been in the era that he was living? What would a Christian community look like? What would their community gatherings look like? How would they engage in worship together? And it was a kind of a narrative prop, maybe. But there were some other names as well, which, you can go back and listen to the episode.
I was particularly pleased with the name for the scribe, Meticulous Stylus.
Exactly. Meticulous Stylus. Dear me. Oh, well, the outcome of that was there was a serious outcome of that, which was actually that the day-to-day practices and worship, you can see links with what we do today. So those things that we do and the tensions that we see in the life of Christians today, we could see them in the life of first century Christians as well.
Okay. And we actually did cover quite a bit about the early church. There was that episode on a day in the life of a first century Christian. But we also did a series of 3, didn't we, on church aspects of church history, covering baptism and persecution and then organization, I think was the third one. So we spent a bit of time on that. Why do you think it was helpful to focus on that?
Yeah, we did actually a series of 3 on that. And I think the one that we did on the day in the life of was a kind of an intro to that, just to kind of set the scene for the series. And we had Stephen Blake, who came and so helped us out with that topic. He's been working on that material for a while. So we asked him to come and do a 3-part session with us on that. To be honest with you, I did get slightly obsessed by the whole thing. I didn't go as far as shaving my head and kind of like getting the whole sort of the monk's outfit or anything, but I did kind of bought the Penguin, was it History of Church series, and got deeply involved in that, read huge sections of that to try and get some context. And I think the reason why it was useful, the reason why I think it was, it's important to kind of consider these things. We are shaped here in 2023 now. We're shaped in part by all of the theological shenanigans that have happened over the ages. Ever since Matthew picked up his quill and Moses picked up his hammer and chisel, there's been cultural pressures on that message, and there's been political things shaping the communities, and how do we sort of get through that to what the truth of the message really is, and how do we work out what to ignore from all of those pressures and which bits do we embrace. So I think that's why it's useful to kind of consider the historical background to the church life that we live today.
Okay, thanks. So there might be a couple of anachronisms in there with quills and hammers and chisels. And
Maybe.
Just as an aside, shenanigans was the word that won the Twitter poll for the English quirky word of the year.
Wow.
There we go. Yeah. Josh, have you done any looking into church history?
Certainly not, shaving my head into the tonsure and getting the cool rope belt out. But Lawrence's point is absolutely right. And certainly I should be spending some more time looking at the early church, I think, because the setup of a church requires more than one person. And that's exactly what Christians today experience, and it's what we see throughout history, that Christians are very rarely individuals alone. They're part of groups. The message, the teaching, the actions, the commandments are things that will be seen by others, will be noticed. And Jesus sets up that sort of relationship, that interpersonal kind of setup in a number of different places. And the early church movement, is one of groups coming together in different parts of the world in slightly different circumstances, some richer, some poorer, some on the coast, some inland. And there's challenges, there's opportunities, there's good and bad, and there's a lot to learn from it in today's churches. The
other thing that I got from that series that I thought was really helpful was how things changed in the church quite dramatically. And basically, to look back at it, we can learn from past mistakes. And if we don't do it, then history will just repeat itself over and over again, won't it? That's, I think, what often happens, isn't it? So, for example, the persecution in the church, which was initially, this movement was a very persecuted movement, but it went from being the persecuted to being the persecutors. That's the right way of saying it. So that they became a persecuting church, basically, with anyone that didn't agree with them. And that's what came out of that episode. And that's really quite a big warning, isn't it? If we ever find ourselves part of a church community or part of a church that starts dishing out treatment like that, then that's a huge red flag that we're not in step with Jesus. So I think that's really, really helpful to look back and see how things changed from the first century, and then we can then apply that to ourselves.
Yeah, and to your point, Dan, about how things change, one of the things that really struck me when I was doing the research and also when I was speaking to Stephen was the way that baptism turned from being a thing that a believer used in order to kind of say, this is what I believe, into basically an instrument of the state to kind of control everyone. Yeah. I thought that was a really interesting transition. And then also how the Reformation, people kind of realised that actually this is not right. And so that's, to your point, that things change. And for us, we've got to have the Bible in one hand and kind of this church history in the other. And go, okay, so what was right, what was wrong?
Great. So that's the church history elements that we covered. I'm just thinking about what else we've covered. I particularly remember the inspiration episode that you and I did, Josh, where we took some time to demonstrate how easy it is for communication to break down. And I think you had a whole load of examples of ambiguous statements that could be misinterpreted, and we had to hold you back a bit. So, Josh, now is your opportunity to give us a few more examples.
I think it is fascinating because obviously, in these days of Zoom and Meet and Teams and all the rest of it, communication breaking down and being difficult because of echoes and patchy Wi-Fi and stuff like that is the norm. But even, a sentence written down in front of you, if that can still confuse you or the message can't get through, that's an interesting thing to think about. So yeah, we did a list of what are called garden path sentences, where you start reading it and then you realize halfway through that you had sort of assumed you knew where the sentence was going, but then you end up somewhere else. So I'll read one out and I'll do it wrong and then I'll explain it. So, because he always jogs a mile seems short distance to him. Whereas if you say it the other way around, because he always jogs a mile. Oh, sorry, I've done it wrong twice there. Let me confuse myself. Because he always jogs, a mile seems a short distance to him. So there's a little worked example then of someone confusing themselves reading a sentence that's written down right in front of them whilst being recorded. So if you'll enjoy that. But yes, there were loads more that we went through in our in the inspiration episode to demonstrate that even one person reading their own mother tongue may encounter difficulties from time to time. How much more careful do we need to be? How much more thinking do we need to put into reading something that's been translated from another language, and not another modern language, but an ancient language that isn't used quite in exactly the same way that it is today, from a different part of the world, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I think the point was we've just got to recognise that our interpretation is our interpretation, and it is not where the authority of the inspired word lies. It lies in whatever the intended meaning was.
Exactly. So I think that, yes, shenanigans might be the watchword for 2022, but I think that episode was humility or our humbleness when we think about our own interpretation.
Yeah. Cool. So before we move on, any other memorable moments from our material from 2022?
Just stepping outside of the actual episodes that we recorded for a moment, I started doing some of those talking head videos. If you're following us on Facebook and Instagram and various other places, including TikTok. Now, I know, Laurence, you're an avid social media follower. No doubt you've been following along on TikTok as well.
In a sense, yeah.
In a parallel
I
universe.
watch over the shoulder when you do them.
That's very good. Yeah, and it's been quite good fun to do those, to try and distill down some small idea from an episode or from anything that's kind of related to the episode. Do a short talking head video and circulate it. I don't know whether or not any TikTok user is a podcast listener as well. I'm not entirely sure. They might overlap, really, if you drew a Venn diagram. But there's been some curious comments, surprisingly a large number of views, and people saving the video and liking it. So, you know, there's must be people out there following along and liking it, as well as your sort of local militant atheist and whatever as well, which is, you know, it's fine. They can comment if they like and make the video be seen more if they drive engagement.
I thought you had to throw some dance moves to be on TikTok.
Yeah, well, I've started to sway a little bit more, actually. I thought if Justin Briley from the Unbelievable Show can do it, and you see him doing it, he does sway around a bit and, you know, gets very animated. So, you know, I'm following along from his latest moves.
You might have to get focus tracking for that.
Oh, there you go. So you know what you're doing, Laurence. You should join the club. The best comment I've had so far was just after the World Cup, when someone commented and said to a video of me talking, saying, "Oh no, Harry Kane has missed the penalty. Now he's turned to God and he's talking all this stuff." And I was like, okay, so I'm being likened to Harry Kane.
Got a career as a Harry Kane lookalike if it ever goes sideways.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Oh, maybe that could be special guest for next year. One episode we'll talk about, you know, leadership or something like that. Perhaps
good,
a guest spot from Harry Kane.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. So anyone else listening along, if you're on TikTok, search us out.
Cool. Okay, anything else from 2022 before I hit you with some quick fire questions?
Well, 2022 certainly for me personally has been a year of a lot of DIY. We moved house and it needs a lot of upkeep, and I don't have a lot of skill in that area.
The DIY is pretty simple, isn't it? If it doesn't move and it should, it's WD-40. If it does move and it shouldn't, it's duct tape. That's
something for your other YouTube channel there, Paul. Just before we move on, I really enjoyed sort of the start of the book overview sessions that we've been doing. For me, you know, listening to all of you guys put together your sort of 40-minute overviews of books have been really interesting. So kind of that has been a highlight, and, you know, long may it continue into this year. I think we'll probably be continuing that series. I think
we've got a few books of the Bible left to cover. Yeah. So a couple of quick fire questions for you now then. So still looking back at 2022, what's the most interesting book that you've read in 2022? Josh?
So for me, it is My Body Is Not a Prayer Request by Amy Kenny. It's about disability justice in the church. A very sort of bracing and challenging read for me, having not thought much about disability theology and how someone who has a disability might read something, someone without a disability might read and take something very different from. A very interesting and a sort of eye-opening reading of the man who was born blind and the division that she sees between the biblical understanding of curing versus the biblical understanding of healing, and how, even though the man who was born blind gains his sight at the beginning of the chapter, a whole host of problems and issues and sort of fractures in relationships happen after that. So although he has been cured, he hasn't yet been healed. So I would really recommend that. My Body Is Not a Prayer Request. That was my number one for 2022.
Excellent. Thank you, Josh. Dan?
Can I give you a list of all the interesting books I haven't completed in 2022?
We've all got a list like that.
Yeah. I think the one most recently, the most interesting that I've much enjoyed, what I have read of it, is Bearing God's Name by Carmen Imes, which is an Exodus kind of walkthrough, but particularly about the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, I have come across that, and I think listened to a podcast somewhere of her on that subject, and yeah, it was good stuff. Laurence, your book for 2022?
Yeah, so as you know, I'm an avid reader. So
of Asterix.
Of Asterix, yeah. So apart from How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates, which is an interesting book in itself, I've obviously mentioned the Early Church series, which has kind of occupied a bit of my time. But to be honest with you, I'm going to go a bit sideways, and I'm going to recommend a point-and-click adventure game instead. So I came across a really interesting adventure game called Pentiment a couple of months ago, or a month or so ago. And it's a murder mystery set in 1500s Bavaria, but it's put together as like an illustrated manuscript, and it takes all of its inspiration from like the Nuremberg Chronicle, which was an ancient document of like I think it's the Chronicle of the World in 1493. So all the illustrations, they've basically taken that and turned it into a computer game. But it teaches you all about Christianity in the 1500s.
That's Reformation period, isn't it?
Reformation period. How the scribes, created documents, the various people who were gathering together and making theological decisions at the time and things like that. But it's all done in the context of a point-and-click computer game, which for me is a lot easier to consume.
Fantastic. And in that vein, my book of 2022 that I would call out is called The Nearly Infallible History of the Reformation by Nick Page, which is a history book, but it's got a slightly tongue-in-cheek twist to it. It's all about the winners and the losers of that period, the diet of worms, and the incredible rudeness of Martin Luther's writings. I mean, absolutely so rude to any of his opponents, whether they're a pope or a bishop. It's just fantastic stuff.
It's like Twitter.
Yeah. So some things, while we think things have gone downhill, perhaps they haven't. But anyway, but there is a little chapter on what he calls the radical Reformation. And it talks about the Anabaptists in Switzerland, in particular, in a few particular towns in Switzerland. And there's a little sentence in there where he says, but some of the Anabaptists went too far. Even for the Anabaptists, they rejected the doctrine of the Trinity on the grounds that it was nowhere stated in the Bible. And that's where he leaves it. He doesn't say anything more about
Okay.
that. But here we are, four of us. I'm not sure we describe ourselves as radical reformationists, but, taking things, looking at the Bible from a Unitarian perspective and rejecting the doctrine of the Trinity just for that reason. It is nowhere stated in the Bible. So there we go. That's a good collection of books to take away and think about. So another question: most interesting place you visited in 2022? Josh, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. It was my birthday in September, and so I dragged my wife on a long hike through lots of stinging nettles in Sponley Woods to a abandoned Roman villa, and under most tarpaulins are unassuming, but this was an extra unassuming tarpaulin, was a beautiful Roman mosaic that's sort of been abandoned and left to just sort of be looked at by deer and frogs and things that were roaming around out there. So yeah, that was very, very interesting. Just to sort of see, a little relic of a massive empire that once ruled the world and now is just underneath, a tarp from Halfords or something like that with a little geocache box next to it, and is in the middle of the woods.
You
didn't
knew it was
discover
there.
it
You went to see that.
I haven't. I
stumbled across it.
Yeah, no, I wasn't wearing my Indiana Jones hat and bag at the time. So no, I did know it was there, although it was very difficult to find.
So Dan, how about you?
Without a doubt, Newquay in Wales, and not just for the stunning beach and the dolphins in the bay. And no, it's a great place there in West Wales, but stumbled across on one of the seafront walks, cliffside walk place called Castelbach, or something like that, however it's pronounced. Basically,
there goes all you Welsh TikTok followers.
Yeah, I've got Welsh roots. Should do a better job than that, shouldn't I? Yeah. Celtic Iron Age fort on the top of this cliffside, which you can see the lines of the fortifications and the walls, which it's always great, actually, when you see something random like that in the UK that is from the period of basically somewhere in the Bible. But, this could be from the time of the kings or from the time of the exile, or maybe even a bit earlier than that. Yeah, it's just good to sometimes to stand in a place like this and think, oh, when they were cooking pigs here or firing arrows at invaders or whatever, there was Sennacherib riding across to Jerusalem at the same time, or whatever it was.
Where they weren't killing pigs.
No, they wouldn't have been killing pigs there, no. Maybe firing arrows, yeah.
Cool. Okay, Laurence.
I've been to a few places, but I think I'll probably stick with Lancaster. Basically, we were driving up the M6 to the Lake District. I was driving up there with a car full of friends to go camping on the mountains, and had a blowout on my car. And as a result of that, we spent an inordinate number of hours waiting for the repair of the tyre, and wandered around Lancaster, and we found a couple of interesting things. We found the Queen Victoria Memorial, which is right in the middle of Lancaster, with like friezes on every side and like wisdom and fortune, inscribed on each corner. And we had to try and work out who the various characters were from politics and arts and stuff. That was quite interesting. And then we wandered across to the cathedral, which was a beautiful building. They've got an amazing acoustics. So we walk in there and I look around and I go, okay, so it's all clear. So I let out a nice bass note, sort of just to try and get the whole building resonating. So I have a couple of notes, and then I walk to the front and I notice there's somebody sat at the front, like the most motionless person ever in the world, just sat there. And I'm probably thinking, oh no, who are these complete wallies coming in here, releasing a random bass note? So yeah, beautiful building.
Great. And so actually for me, similarly, it's a church building, but we managed to get away out of the UK over the summer to Iceland, and we visited the cathedral in Reykjavik, Hallgrímskirkja, which means Hallgrím's church, basically. And from the outside, it's the most amazing building because it's designed around the hexagonal basalt columns that you see a lot of in Iceland. But to go inside, because the Church of Iceland is a Lutheran church, it's absolutely bare inside. There is nothing on the walls. There's a stained glass window at the very front. There's absolutely nothing on the walls, which is quite a contrast to many of the churches that I've visited and cathedrals in other parts of the world.
You release a bass note?
I did not do that. No, there was actually somebody playing the organ.
Ideal opportunity to release a bass note, I'd say.
So let's look forward now. We've talked a lot about 2022, what we've done there in various different ways. So let's think about going into 2023. And we're in a world that is increasingly strange and uncertain, and we are looking at a situation where there's an ongoing war in Ukraine. And actually, I did a look at Google searches for the Book of Revelation, and there was a particular spike in searches for the Revelation in February of this year when the war in Ukraine. So, maybe when there's uncertain times and crises in the world, people look to certain parts of the Bible for meaning, understanding what's going on. But, let's just have a think about what should, going into 2023 in this strange situation, how should we react? What should a Christian reaction to that kind of situation be?
Yeah, it's certainly been a year of upheaval. I mean, we thought that was 2020. And then the next couple of years have come along and they've chucked things in the air again, haven't they? And especially with the war, like you say, in Europe, which is really quite devastating, to be honest. I think it shows that there's a need for Jesus to finish the work that he's already started, that he came and he started the work, and there are Christians following him and living as he asked them to live, and that's all fine, that's great, that's exactly as it should be, and the gospel message spreading throughout the world, that's what it has been. But there's a kingdom that needs to be fully established, properly established, basically. When we turn to look at the horrors in Ukraine, and then the horrors that have repeated themselves throughout the world in parts of Africa and Asia and North Korea and China, and it's just all over, isn't it? Wherever you look, there's this whole idea of, yes, Jesus has come, he's inaugurated things, he's kicked things off, he's asked people to follow him, but we really need him to come again and finish the work and create peace, really. So yeah, I think the reaction to all this stuff going on should be to realize that and try and promote that message more and more, as well as helping and assisting where we can.
Yeah, and I tend to think the war in Ukraine has penetrated deeper into the sort of Western mind because of its proximity. Whereas wars which have been equally devastating and terrible upheaval for people's lives, whether it's Syria, Iraq, or in Africa, have happened. It's happening in all sorts of different places. Josh, do you have a perspective on this as well?
Well, I think Dan's point is really excellent. I suppose for some people, what they see will be overwhelming. It will be difficult to put into a perspective or get a handle on it and to begin to think about it. And I think one reaction that you might find helpful is to consider some of the things that the prophets say. One sort of summation of some of the prophetic messages that I really quite like, that I see out online every now and again, is the fact that God sees everything that money hides. So all the burdens that are being put on people, the waste and the worry that is caused by the conflict, as well as the amazing sort of acts of generosity and support and sort of positive human interaction that you see in the midst of all these difficult things. Those things are some of the things that the biblical writers and thinkers are obsessing over. I'm thinking about your Micahs, your Amoses. They have an awful lot of things to say and some helpful direction and perhaps a bit of perspective to give, because each year, as we've been saying, goes on, and it seems to be that every trip around the sun, more and more we are thirsting after justice and looking for that kingdom to be fully established.
Yeah, and there's some pretty strong language against social injustice and oppression in those prophets, certainly. Laurence, anything to add?
Yeah, all of these, this kind of mounting problems in society, which we're seeing, it's kind of another wave of undulating mess that we see throughout history with mankind involved in it. Wars, problems, injustice, and things proceeding and having impacts and on people's circumstances all the way around the world. So, man thinks they're pretty switched on and they can fix stuff, but really we don't have answers to kind of the fundamental questions in life, really. And so it kind of brings to mind, the hope of the gospel. It's still super relevant to us today, and it's still very compelling to people who are suffering through these really difficult situations. And to your point, Dan, around Jesus needs to come back. That's kind of how Revelation ends, isn't it? It says, "Surely I am coming soon. Amen. Come, Lord Jesus." And that's the kind of that's maybe why people are looking at Revelation.
Yeah, people do tend to look at Revelation sometimes to see, what's going to be the next move? Is this thing prophesied? Has this thing been predicted? Is this, the turn of events that we're going to be seeing? When actually the book is more about, this is how you should live your life in the middle of upheaval in the world. Turning and looking at these events isn't just we shouldn't just be looking at them as, this is going to now fulfill this is going to fulfill that. Actually, there is a compassionate response, and how should it react in the face of these terrible tragedies that comes out of the book of Revelation itself.
And actually, the crises, the uncertainty, it sort of comes closer to home as well, with economic uncertainty, recession, energy bills you mentioned, Laurence, and the increasing number of refugees moving around the world, some of them coming to the UK, and climate change and those kind of aspects as well.
Yeah, so I think for myself, during lockdown and the height of COVID, obviously, a lot of my focus and people's focuses were on their own individual health, and those were concerns were real, and of course it was totally reasonable and normal to be thinking about that. We've been talking about the need and hope of the gospel that will address those things, but we also see the Bible's sharpest words. Its most searing criticism is how groups with power are mistreating the very people that they're supposed to serve. And so we have a great opportunity, I think, going into 2023 to think about those people who are in need, to think also about why they're in need. What is it that's been causing that, and who has been causing that, and what can be done about it. And as we've been saying, we see in the leadership that the Jesus models and is trying to encourage in those who are looking to follow him a hopeful and positive way forwards.
Yeah, on a lighter note, I've now got my slogan for my new political party, which is more jumpers, less gas. But on a serious note, I think if we look at how we react as Christians in the current circumstances, I think we have the gospel, which we can preach to those around us. And I think if we couple that with some kind of practical help, these things come together really well. I mean, the whole practical help of individuals and communities, and we see that all the way through the New Testament. And so we can do the same. We have difficult situations around us. We can apply the same kind of lessons that we see in the first century churches to kind of our own sort of lives as well.
Yeah, so being sojourners doesn't mean absolving ourselves of all responsibility for anything that's going on around. It means helping where we can, doing what we can, but recognizing that the ultimate solution comes from somewhere else.
Yeah, the only thing additional that I can think of that's important is the fact that we all, the four of us, we're part of a church community, aren't we? We're part of a network of churches, the Christadelphian community. And there is, as there will be when there's a network of churches, there is lots of support. There are charities, there are funds, there are lots of things to help people, and then lots of opportunities to support and help others, which is exactly how it should be, isn't it? So in times of economic hardship or whatever, there are ways of finding practical help alongside the spiritual help, the growth as discipleship and everything else that goes with being part of a church. So just recommending to anyone listening that if you're not part of a church, if you're not part of a community, to really seek that out as much as possible, to have fellowship, to have that support and the opportunities to serve and support others. That's really, that's the template that Jesus taught and the apostles taught. So that's something to try and do. And of course, we're part of the Christadelphian community. It's worldwide. There's so many Christadelphian churches all around that would be happy to welcome people. That would be as good a start as any if your views and your beliefs and values align with the sorts of stuff that we natter on about in these podcasts.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, that's a really good point. The mutual support that comes from being part of a community in that way, and the way a community like that is better placed to reach out to those around in the local towns and cities as well. So finally, then, perhaps just for our podcasts and what we're going to do at Bible Feed over the next year, what are we going to be covering? Dan, do you want to kick us off there?
So we've started the big project of going through all the books in the Bible and doing an introduction episode on them. So we will be continuing that for sure. I'd like to think that we'd finished the first 5 books, the law, the Torah. So we've done 3, so we've got 2 more to do. Hopefully we can finish that this year. But we're not just going to work through one by one, are we? We're going to be picking out some from later in the Old Testament and some from the New Testament as well, just to keep that balance. But then hopefully there'll be a good library that we'll be assembling for people to help them in their Bible reading.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a diverse set of texts in the Bible that it's good, and it's probably healthy to move around the Bible a bit and not just work through from the beginning. So, I think I'd like to do something on the letter to the Romans at some point. Yeah. And intertwined with the book introductions, we've been looking at certain themes as well. So I think a couple that we'll try and pick off in the coming months is something around the devil, demons, Satan, those kind of words which are often associated with supernatural beings in some form. Kind of look at the scriptural angle on that, and maybe also look at the Spirit, the Holy Spirit gift, the comforter or the helper as it appears in John's Gospel, and do something on that theme as well. Josh, what do you think we should be looking to cover?
The 2 main areas that I think I'm going to be looking at is thinking about the Bible and how it is used in community, how people sort of study it together and put it into practice alongside other people. And the other section I'm really interested in at the moment is how the Bible talks about money and wealth and debt and all essentially numbers and things like that, really putting my GCSE mathematics to the test.
Yeah, when you work out how to get the camel through the eye of the needle, just let us all know.
We'll announce that first on TikTok, I think.
The great dance move to be had there, I'm sure. Yeah, Laurence, final.
Yes, I think from my side, it'd be great to kind of see some of the aspects of the life of worship, things like prayer, music, and communion. Why do we do them together? So a little bit similar to what Josh said, but maybe I think we're going to try and get somebody who's a great musician to come and speak to us.
It's a good blend of talking about the Bible and faith in the modern world, which is what we've always been doing, isn't it? So really, hopefully we can continue that, the Bible study and the practical explanations as well alongside. And
excellent. And hopefully the last 40 minutes or so has demonstrated that we're just ordinary people trying to understand the Bible. Oh, maybe not. So I think before we descend into farce, I'll draw our proceedings to a close there. And thank you all for giving us your thoughts and contributing to this. And look out for the next episode, which is going to be on the letter to Philemon, which is one of our Bible introductions, but it's unusual in that it will probably be much quicker for you to just read the letter to Philemon rather than listen to our episode. But our episode is of course great, so listen to that as well. So that's coming up next. So thank you all for listening. Thanks for your support in 2022, and hope you continue to enjoy what we do. Take a look at the back catalogue that's building on biblefeed.org. You can see us on Facebook and on Instagram, and go and look for Dan/Harry Kane on TikTok.